What's up, everybody? Welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews. I am Wyatt, and today on the show, I want to be talking about In a Violent Nature. If you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on social media, Twitter, Instagram, what have you. Also, check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Drop in and leave us a good review there. So, yeah, I'm talking about In a Violent Nature. This movie just released over the weekend. It's on its limited theatrical run before it ends up hitting Shudder here in like a month or so. I don't think there's an official date on that as of yet, but it is going to be going to Shudder eventually. It has an interesting concept that's really grabbed a lot of people as soon as it was announced in that first trailer came out. The basic concept is you take a typical slasher that's set in the woods, kind of like a Friday the 13th type thing. Pretty much the killer is kind of like a great value or a kind of a Jason clone in a way, just without the hockey mask. It has this cheesy ass, like old school firefighter's helmet that it has on, which I will get to in a minute. But the big twist of the movie is you're not following the kids throughout this slasher movie in the woods. You're actually following from the point of view of the killer throughout the whole movie. And I'm not talking about like a first person point of view or anything like that. You actually, the camera is like a couple steps behind the killer, and it's like a behind the back, over the shoulder type thing. It's like you're playing like a survival horror third person action game, like a Resident Evil or something like that. You're kind of, the camera's just stuck behind this killer throughout the whole movie pretty much, and you get to follow this killer as it's, stalking its victims, kind of setting them up in certain ways. It's just the killer's point of view throughout a typical slasher type movie that you normally don't see. Now, this is the type of concept that after you watch the movie, is way better on paper. It's way better in your mind, just thinking of like, oh, that would be really cool to see. But it doesn't exactly translate to film that well. This movie is directed by Chris Nash, so I think in execution, I think it accomplished exactly what he wanted to. But going into it, hearing the rumblings from like early reviews and early like other people that have seen it on Twitter and what have you, you got the impression that it's a very like art house type movie. It's very slow, which is what I kind of expected. You're following like a silent zombie killer throughout the whole thing. You kind of expect it to be a little slow paced. And it really is. I mean, this movie is certainly not going to be for everybody. I think a lot of people are going to find this movie boring. I didn't think it was really boring. I think it goes just long enough in between these little stretches, and then something exciting happens. I think there's just long enough in between there so you don't really get bored. But for those who aren't accustomed to like kind of a slower paced or slow burn type movies, I think a lot of people are going to get bored in this movie, because really what you're seeing throughout this whole thing is you are just watching a killer walking around these woods until it kind of runs into, one of these kids, or like that are kind of split up from the group, or comes across the campfire or what have you. But there are a lot, and I mean a lot of scenes, just drawn out scenes of this killer just walking through the woods. Just walking, 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 maybe see somebody, keeps just walking around. There is a lot of drawn out shots, a lot of beautiful landscape shots as well. I mean, you get to see a lot of that in the trailer, like the lake with the steam going across it and the mountains. There's really not much talking throughout the movie, a lot of silence. I knew this going in. I kind of knew what to expect going into it, but it really doesn't hit you until that first 10 or 15 minutes where you're just sitting there watching this killer walk, and you're like, oh, this hour and a half movie may feel a lot longer than that. Now, you really don't get too much of a story because you are following this killer throughout the whole thing. You do get some backstory and lore about the killer and about the area, mainly from the kids that he is stalking, specifically around one scene at this campfire. It really kind of reminds me, it's kind of like a throwback to Friday the 13th Part 2, where all the kids at the camp are around the fire, and the guy's telling the story about Jason, and you get to see a lot of the kills from the previous movie and what have you. But you get a huge lore dump there where they're telling you about the history of this killer, the murder spree that he ended up going on, and that he eventually came back at one point. A lot of this stuff, a lot of this lore, and a lot of the story that's in the movie is told from the kids around like the campfire, just kind of conversations these kids are having. But the one thing I actually really liked about it was you kind of get the typical slasher movie in the background. For those who haven't seen the movie, to know what I'm talking about, is once these kids kind of start, turning up dead one by one, when the killer starts showing up around the cabin, you hear the kids kind of talking like, all right, we need to call the cops. We need to get out of here. No, we need to go find our friends, such thing. It's a lot of that normal conversations you would have in a typical slasher movie. So it's kind of cool that while you're following the killer and you're seeing what this killer is doing throughout the whole movie, you kind of have this typical slasher movie in the background a little bit. You're hearing these things that you would normally hear in a slasher movie, like these kids trying to come up with a plan to try to stop the killer or try to get out of the woods. You don't have that up front in your face. You kind of hear it in passing as the killer's moving around, which is kind of cool. And it kind of makes me want not necessarily a sequel, but I kind of want another movie where it is the typical slasher from the same character's point of view. You could take the same character, same killer, same story and kills, just have it from a typical slasher standpoint from the kid's point of view. I think that would be really cool, just kind of a cool double feature. You have one movie from the killer's point of view, one movie from the, the kids or the teenagers point of view. I think that would be a really cool double feature. I don't think there's any plans for anything like that. But for me, I was just kept thinking of that concept the whole time I was watching it. And I think that would be super cool if they actually did it. So the killer itself that you're following around, like I mentioned, is kind of like, for the lack of a better term, like a great value version of Jason, like a store brand version of Jason, this big hulking type zombie killer that's just stalking around these woods, super fucking slow. Like they could have made this dude just go a little faster, but he's literally just lumbering like a zombie through these woods, super slow. Some of these shots go on for a little too long, like way too long at certain points, of him just walking around, and then it eventually cuts to him walking somewhere else. It kind of makes you feel like you're in like an old school PC point and click type game where you click on a destination, you see your character walking, and then it just cuts to a different angle. It kind of reminded me of that in a way. And I think a lot of the issues I have with these long drawn out shots and them going on a little too long, I think you could have found a way to make it a little bit more exciting just by editing it a little. Jesus, why am I having such a hard time saying editing? By editing it a little differently. But I like the design of the killer. You do get one specific shot of his face at one point without the mask, and it's very well done. I think the director is a practical effects artist as well, so I think that's where it really came from, and I think he did a bang up job with it, did a fantastic job. The kills, which a lot of people are talking about, some of them are absolutely fucking gnarly, and a couple of them are reasons I would say just to watch the movie in general. Like there's one specifically, the yoga scene, which is a lot of people are talking about. That yoga scene kill specifically is one I would recommend just watching the movie for immediately, or once it comes out, you can probably watch that kill on YouTube. But the lead up to it helps a lot as well. But man, that one specific kill is fucking gnarly. I mean, it's a kill I have never seen before. Super creative. There's a couple of them in this movie that are like, damn, how the hell did they come up with that? That is wild. I'm not saying it's like on like Terrifier or Terrifier 2 levels of out there or fucking craziness, but specifically that yoga kill is on a whole nother level. And there is one kill that is like towards the back half of the movie, that is creative. I did like it, but it goes on way, way, way too fucking long. And for those who have seen the movie, know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not really trying to get into too many spoilers because with not a lot going on in the movie itself, I don't want to give too much away for anybody that's planning on watching it. But there is one kill later in the movie towards the back half where I was like, this is just going on forever. Like, come on. Like, I'm ready to move on. Let's go on to the next scene now. But like I mentioned, the killer design is really cool. They definitely made him like a big hulking brute, kind of like a later zombie version of Jason. The only thing I didn't really like about the killer is whenever he, acquires the old school fireman mask or helmet, it just doesn't do anything for me. It's not scary. It's just corny. It looks cheesy. I don't buy it at all. It definitely looks better from the back, but whenever you're seeing it like straight up front, you're seeing like a full frontal of the mask, it just doesn't look good. I feel like could have been other options they could have went with to make it a little bit better, or just go with the fucking zombie face that he has. And it gives it a kind of a comical element in a way where the rest of the movie kind of, I feel like, takes itself seriously in a way. But the mask just doesn't do anything for me. They could have lost that for all I care. The weapons that he uses are fucking awesome. They're like old school fireman's tools. Like one is just like these two big ass hooks on this huge like metal chain that he uses, and this huge old school like fire axe that he has. Great weapon design, great kills with those weapons as well. Like the yoga scene that I mentioned comes into play using those weapons. Another issue or so I had with the movie was the acting. The acting was pretty damn bad throughout the whole movie, through everybody. I mean, the kids at the cabin, some of the adults you come into contact with later. The acting was just not good at all. You just did a little bit more casting, maybe you got a couple other people in here. The one part of the movie I had an issue with the acting was the campfire scene where you have the lore dump where they're telling you the story about the killer. The one actor they chose to tell the story, he doesn't speak clearly. He kind of mumbles. I kind of wish there were subtitles just so I can understand what he was saying at certain points, but he's just not speaking clearly. You had six other people that could have told the story around the campfire, and the one person you chose couldn't even speak clearly. He's kind of mumbling. You kind of had to really listen to get what he was trying to say. I needed some subtitles or something at that point, but like there wasn't anybody that could have did this monologue a little better. Like, come on now. The decision making, and I know I talk about this through horror movies, through different reviews at some point. Poor decision making from these kids is on a whole nother level in this movie. There are so many stupid decisions that happen in this. And I know this is a slasher movie. I know this is a horror movie. There's going to be some bad decisions here and there. I understand that. But it's on a whole nother level. And I'm going to go back to that yoga scene in general, because I'm not going to give the kill away or anything like that. This girl is doing yoga up on like this big cliff type area. She turns around and sees the killer coming at her. Instead of like running around, either way, she just turns around, goes immediately to the edge of the cliff and like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Am I just gonna jump off or am I gonna let him kill me? She doesn't even try to get away. She could have went either way around him into the woods, but instead she just goes straight up to the edge of the cliff. And it's like, you could have easily got away from this dude. There's a couple of people that get killed in this movie that's like, you easily could have got away from this dude because he doesn't run. He just fucking walks. You easily could have got away, but you're just fucking stupid. But I understand that's with a lot of movies. It just seemed like it was on a whole nother level of stupidity at that point, which just goes into play that the writing wasn't all great to begin with. And I know it sounds like I'm really shitting on this movie at this point, but I actually had a decent time with it. I think this movie accomplished what it really set out to do in the long run. I think the director did what they wanted to do. And I mean, you're not really going to a horror movie expecting great acting or great dialogue, especially a slasher like this. But whenever you have a whole movie that there's really not a lot of dialogue and there's a lot of just drawn out sequences of silence, when that dialogue and acting comes into play, it really stands out as not being good, as not being great. It could have, you could have had done a couple more takes, or you could have maybe done a couple more rewrites at that point. And I know it sounds like I'm shitting on the movie, but overall, I actually had a decent time with the movie. It was entertaining. I was grabbed through it. I wouldn't say I was really bored throughout the whole thing. My fiance, who actually went and saw it with me, she didn't like it at all. She was bored as fuck through the whole thing. She almost fell asleep a couple times, she said, which I could totally understand. Like I mentioned before, this movie is not going to be for everybody. It's similar to Skinamarink. For anybody that saw Skinamarink last year, I wasn't a fan of it at all. I thought it was boring as shit. I can easily see how there are certain scenes that were creepy and it was effective at certain points, but it just did not work as like a full length movie. Same with this one. I think what I probably would have been better as a shorter film, like a short film type thing. But as a full like 90-minute type movie, I'm not sure it really worked out. It is a really cool concept for fans of slashers or horror movies. I definitely recommend checking it out at least once. This is a movie I'm probably not going to see again at any point. Once you see it once, you don't really need to see it again. I think the kills were really good. I mean, there's a couple that were kind of a mixed bag, but I think overall the kills were really good and really what makes this movie stand out and kind of give you a reason to watch the movie other than just kind of the point of view of the killer, aspect of the movie. And now my biggest fucking gripe of the movie, the one that stands out above them all, because the other ones I had were just kind of nitpicks that didn't really take me out of the movie. The biggest fucking gripe I had of all were the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie. And I'm not going to go into spoilers like I mentioned because there's not really a lot happening in the movie. I don't want to give too much away, but the last 15 or 20 minutes could have really benefited from another rewrite or two. It just was not great at all. I mean, like I mentioned, you have the whole movie from this killer's perspective. In the last 15, 20 minutes, it switches to somebody else's perspective entirely, somebody you haven't been following throughout the whole movie. And then it really doesn't do much with it. I mean, there really isn't any huge climax or huge confrontation that happens. This movie just kind of just slowly goes and crawls to the end and to the credits. And not really much happens in that 15, 20 minutes. I kind of understand what they were trying to do. They really want to give you a sense of paranoia that the character you're following is having and the kind of the mindset that this character you're following is having. It just doesn't work based off of everything else that you had in the movie. That last 15 or 20 minutes or so could have been cut out entirely. Definitely needed a rewrite at some point because you could have did something else with the killer at that point. That 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the movie was the most boring part of the movie, where it should have been the most exciting, in my opinion. That should be your climax and everything. But no, this movie just slowly crawls to the finish line. It doesn't really do anything with it. There is really no payoff. And that's what kind of pissed me off at the end. Like, I was fine with the movie all the way up until that very end. I was like, really, that's really how you're going to go out with this one? It just really didn't do anything for me. And I think I think that ending's gonna piss off a lot of people. There may be some people that liked it, there may be some people that works for, just not me, especially based off of everything we've seen up to that point previously. That ending was god awful. That ending was trash. With that being said, though, it was entertaining. It did have a lot of cool kills in it. I think it was definitely worth the watch at least once, due to how interesting it is and how cool of a concept that it is, because it hasn't really been done before. But outside of that, it's not a movie you really need to watch again at any point. Now, out of like a buy it, rent it, or miss it, for huge horror fans and slasher fans, I definitely say rent this movie. Definitely check it out whenever it goes on Shudder eventually. I definitely say you should watch it at least once. Now, for like the casual horror fans, I would say miss this one. I think a casual horror fan is going to be bored as shit throughout this whole movie, and I think they're going to hate it. But overall, I thought it was decent. I think it accomplished what it set out to do. I just think there was a lot more that could have been done with it, or there was a lot of stuff that could have been fixed with it in the end. It was okay. It was just okay. I don't think it deserves all the hype that it's getting, on social media and everywhere else. It was just okay. But yeah, it is my opinion. So definitely go out, check it out for yourself. If you have seen it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments, what you liked, what you didn't like about it. That is the show for the day. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, wherever you get your podcast, drop in, leave us a good review there as well. And I'll see everybody next time.